Hey there, welcome to the DFS Build Thursday Night Football Edition. I'm Kevin Roberts, getting ready to go over the Browns versus Steelers Thursday Night Football Showdown slate at DraftKings for Week 12. It's going to be awful, but hey, there's money to be made, so we're going to get into it anyways. If anything I do here helps you at all, or if you just like watching free content to help you with your process, smash that like button. Helps us out a lot, gets us a little bit more exposure on YouTube, and also subscribe to the channel. If we help you out in any way, that helps us out too, so it's a little bit of a payback. We handed out some money NBA DFS picks yesterday. Your boy was 1v1 away from a takedown. I'll talk about that more on the NBA slate today. We'll be pushing that out. We do NBA videos for every weekday slate. And we do NFL slates NFL videos for every slate, including showdowns when we're able to. So here we go with the Thursday Night Football one, right? Hopefully we can win some money. This game has a really gross total. It is 36.5. It's gross. Certainly a game where we would want to be a little bit over on the defenses and kickers. Short week in Cleveland, divisional game, good defenses. So across the board, it is ugly. But that's probably where the ownership is going to go too. So just in general, we can kind of flip that on its side if we want to and just bet a little bit over and maybe hope that this game turns slightly into a shootout. I don't really anticipate that, but when you have Jameis Winston, you just never know. So we're going to start it off looking at the captain ownership. I don't think we can trust this ownership just yet because right now Cedric Tillman is coming in as the chalkiest captain. Not that that is, well, got something in my eye. Always fun. Not that that is impossible because he's kind of cheap for a captain, only 10.5K. He does have one of the better projections of the slate, and he's been a monster. He's had 8+ targets in 4 straight games here. Let me just double check. 4 straight games. Just had a massive role. He did disappoint last week against the Saints. Only 7.7 fantasy points, but he still had 8 targets. So the role continues to be there. And the way to get way to take advantage of the Steelers is through the air, it seems. The Steelers have been pretty good against the run, only given up 787 rushing yards on the year, but they have given up 8 touchdowns and a little bit of production. The reality is we just need to pick the best possible plays here, and the game is going to be a little bit gross. And I just don't think I want to target Cleveland heavily. They are underdogs. They got smoked by the Saints last week, and they let Taysom Hill drop the most insane game ever by a hybrid player. Just 138 rushing yards, 3 touchdowns. It was ridiculous. If you didn't play Taysom Hill last week and on the main slate, you were very sad about life. So anyways, I don't think we can really trust this ownership, but let's just go over the plays. Tillman, as far as volume goes and as far as price goes, he looks really good. I don't have a problem with them. The Browns should be playing from behind. Jameis Winston is going to chuck it. So if you want to captain Cedric Tillman, that's fine. If he's going to be this chalky, I would go a different direction, though, because number one, it's not a great matchup. It is a low total. And if he's going to be the chalkiest captain, which, again, I don't know if I fully believe that, but if he is going to be the chalkiest captain, I'm just going to go do something else. Right away, the other guy coming in with ownership and a good projection is going to be George Pickens. He looks really good. Another guy with a huge role. Obviously, he's had a nice connection with Russell Wilson since he took over. George Pickens is the most expensive guy on this game in a game with a low total, though. So I don't know if I want to eat that chalk either. He's just so expensive. He's going to make making a really good lineup a little bit restrictive. 12 targets last week, though. He's had 5+ targets in each of his last 6 games. Each of his last 8 games. I mean, he's going to get volume. He's a threat to score a touchdown every time he's out there, even though he only has 2 touchdowns on the year. He's been pretty reliable late with 16 fantasy points or more in 3 of his last 4 games. So across the board, we can play Pickens with confidence. I just think I'd rather play him in flex, where he's obviously going to be a little bit cheaper, and I can get a little bit different in the captain slot. Next up is Elijah Moore. And then following him is Jameis Winston. It looks like so far, again, I don't fully trust this. I'd like to update and get a fresh look at projected ownership the day of the game, but I like to also get this out early so you guys have, so there's breathing room and you guys can actually digest it a little bit before you make your final picks. But the Browns passing game is going to be a little bit popular because there's value to be had there. They're probably going to be playing from behind. And even in a game last week when the Browns only scored 14 points and lost, by 21, Jameis Winston was still straight fire. Now, if they're going to be chalky, though, I don't really want to, stack up the Browns. I think it's always wise to consider getting a decent amount of exposure to one or both quarterbacks. But in a game with such a low total, I think I'm just going to pick one side, and I don't really have any qualms with just kind of eating the chalk, so to speak, by favoring the Steelers, who are favored to win this game and are just the better team at this point, have more to play for. They're playing for first place in the division. They already have first place in the division, but they're playing to hold on to it. The Browns are like 2-8. They have nothing to play for at this point. So I think across the board, firing up Steelers is the way to go. The question is going to be, how do we do that? I think one of the best ways to do that is going to be playing Najee Harris, which this is one reason why I don't know if I believe this captain ownership. He's coming in completely unowned right now. I would imagine that he's fairly chalky on this slate, even though the Browns on the year have not been kind to running backs. I mean, seriously, they've been the 7th best defense against fantasy running backs. While true, Taysom Hill just completely ate them alive last week, and they've given up 9 rushing touchdowns on the year. So Najee has a really nice role. He's not the most explosive back in the world, but he's had 18-plus carries in 4 straight games. We know he's a decent threat to score a touchdown when they get close. He's even a factor in the passing game at times. 4 catches on 5 targets last week. He's been very consistent. While his ceiling is not immense most weeks, he's had 10-plus fantasy points in 6 of his last 8 games. So he's very reliable. And he does have a ceiling if he can fall in the end zone. And in a matchup where they're favored, I think that's a pretty fair expectation. So ownership aside, Najee looks great. If he's unowned or low owned, like if he's like the 4th or 5th owned captain here, I love Najee Harris. And so far, based off of what I'm seeing, he's my flag plant captain in this ugly, ugly game. Now, if you want to go get exposure to the Steelers in a different way, I think we can look at, and not eat the chalk with George Pickens, of course, we can look at Russell Wilson. So you can go get Russell Wilson, who probably will be getting some ownership, but might get less ownership than Pickens. If that is indeed the case, and we can confidently expect that, we can captain Russ and then maybe come back and get Pickens, or then go get somebody else to pair with them, whether it be Najee Harris or a different wide receiver. Obviously, other Steelers wide receivers are not very easy to trust, but we can go look at somebody like Pat Freiermuth, their tight end. Not much of a ceiling guy on the year. I mean, in his last 5 games, he has 1 game over 10 fantasy points, so that is worth noting. However, the Browns have been bottom 10 against tight ends on the year. I don't know how much that Taysom Hill game factors into that, because he's technically a tight end and destroyed them. But he did do pretty well against them as a wide receiver. And just on the year overall, they don't grade out too well. So Freiermuth is a bit sneaky. I think he's an interesting captain play. No matter how this ownership ends up shifting, he's not going to be a chalky guy in the captain slot. I like him in the flex quite a bit. And at 5.4 in the captain, he's really interesting. So if you want to load up on a game like this is not a game where you have to load up. This is not like a game where we have like Rams versus Eagles and we need to go get AJ Brown and Hurts and Kupp and Nakua and Barkley, so you don't have to take a punt here. You can just take the most stable guy, which, by the way, is going to be Najee or Russ, in my opinion. But Pat Freiermuth is a fun sleeper pick in the captain slot, in my opinion. With the Browns needing to pass, you can absolutely entertain Jerry Jeudy, who went bonkers last week, and you can look at Elijah Moore and David Njoku. Both of them are totally fine. They project decently, or all those guys project for over 10 fantasy points. I think they're all fine in the captain. I don't have a problem with them. The matchup just isn't great, and they're not expected to score a lot of points in a game they're going to lose probably. So you can always buy into the narrative of, okay, they're going to lose and they're going to struggle, but they're going to end up throwing a lot, so it's going to lead to production. Possibly true. Worth noting, Njoku and Elijah Moore both were limited in practice. So on a short week, we have to keep an eye on if they are going to be limited in any way or out. And obviously, if that's the case, just look to whatever other punts are there, whether, be the backup tight end for the Browns or another guy for Cleveland as far as value goes, although I wouldn't trust it a whole lot. The other thing we should be looking at here would be Mike Williams is a little bit interesting. 2 weeks ago in his debut with the Steelers, 1 catch for 32 yards and a touchdown, no targets last week. I don't know. I mean, at 4.8K, he feels more like a guy I'd slide in the flex, but it's just like, it's such a gross game where I'm not really trying to load up that much that I just don't think we have to try to captain him. A guy who's got one target in his last 2 games with this team. I just don't think I need to do that, but it's always on the table. Jaylen Warren is in play. Prefer him in the flex. Don't really see the ceiling there with Najee taking up so many touches. He can obviously bust a run at any point, but he just doesn't have a massive role. Kelvin Austin, very, very cheap for the captain. He can be a factor in special teams and deep down the field, just does not have a high volume role. So, so while he's an interesting GPP play and he can always take the ceiling off the defense, just not the best game environment for him, not the best spot to captain him. I think he's an okay flex play because he's really cheap. But if I was doing 150 lineups, sure, a couple of Kelvin Austin captain, plays. But again, the reality is we don't need to take those kind of dives because there's nothing really exciting to load up on. Are we really feeling amazing about punting captain and loading up on Pickens and Russ and Winston and Najee and Chubb and all these guys? I don't know. Not really. Speaking of Chubb, he is a little bit of an interesting captain play. If I'm going away from the Steelers and trying to go away from the narrative of the slate, Chubb is probably the first Browns guy that I get really excited about because he's not going to be owned. He has not been great. He has 1 game over 10 fantasy points in his 4 games since returning from a horrific knee injury. But last week, he showed signs of life. 11 carries for 50 yards, 4.5 yards per carry. We know he's not very involved as a receiver. So if they fall behind like they probably will, I don't know how involved he'll be in that regard. Wasn't super involved. He had no targets and no catches, obviously, last week. He only has 2 catches on the season in 4 games. So that probably tells you all you need to know. But what if he comes out and has success and the Browns are winning? Those things happen. It's a divisional game. It's a short week. The game is in Cleveland. And it seems like Chubb is just kind of starting to slowly get it going. And we know this dude can blow it up. So while I don't have a ton of confidence in Chubb here, and he's not like a must play for me in either captain or flex, I do like him as a captain GPP play that I would build, a handful of lineups, maybe 10 to 20 lineups around, just because he does have a ceiling. And it's not shocking that he's not like the old Chubb yet, or that's taken him a little bit of time to get going. But obviously the Browns want to run the ball. And if they're successful in any way and they're playing with the lead, Chubb in the captain for tournaments is pretty interesting for sure. All right, let's see what else we got here. Steelers and Brown defenses. Again, don't pay too much attention to ownership just yet. But the reality is this game is a very low total. It's not a short week. This is Thursday Night Football in a nutshell. Both these defenses are in play. I greatly favor the Steelers defense. They're going to be chalky. Browns defense might be a little bit owned too. So you can maybe captain the Steelers defense here. We know Jameis Winston takes sacks. We know he throws a lot of picks. We know he can throw a pick 6. Across the board, Steelers defense looks really, really good. You can play them however you want. As a leverage play, the Browns defense will be lower owned by a good deal just by default. And they might not carry a lot of ownership in general because people are going to gravitate towards Steelers plays, and rightfully so. So the Browns as a leverage play, I wouldn't captain them, but as a leverage play in the flex, I think they're okay. It's just not what I'm going to be doing personally. And then the kickers, we have they're not popping here because of course they're not pretty super owned in the captain slot, but they're going to be owned because it's a short week and kickers are always not seeing them in here though. Let me just look over on the DraftKings. See. Okay, so obviously with Chris Boswell, who is a freak. He had 24 fantasy points. I faced him in Dynasty last week. Super fun. 6 for 6 on field goals. He's missed 1 field goal on the year. He's attempted 3 or more field goals in 4 of his last 5 games. The Steelers offense has been pretty good under Russell Wilson, but it does stall enough to make him a very, very good play. I don't mind captaining Chris Boswell in this slate at all. Road game, short week. Kickers thrive on these situations for some reason, and he has just been a menace. So he looks awesome. I think he's going to be owned in the flex. Don't mind eating chalky, flex Chris Boswell at all. But putting him in the captain is a very interesting tournament thing to do because even though he's going to carry ownership overall, he's not going to be in the captain very much. Dustin Hopkins, not as inviting as Chris Boswell. He has 4 fantasy points or fewer in 3 of his last 4 games. So the Browns offense will move the ball enough to give him opportunities, but he has not been very reliable. It's not a good matchup. I mean, you can play him because it's a short week and it's a low total, but I definitely would greatly prefer Chris Boswell here. So another narrative interesting play could be Jerome Ford. He did have 4 catches, 29 yards with the Browns playing from behind last week. So if you don't have interest in Nick Chubb and you think the Steelers are going to be leading this game from the beginning, then Ford will probably eat into Chubb snaps and be a factor as a receiver out of the backfield. So I have interest in Ford as a flex play. I think he's actually an interesting captain play as well if you're not playing Chubb, just because what if he's out there for the whole second half and he racks up like 5 or 6 catches? You're just going to start climbing the standings if that is actually the case. As far as other values, we can look at Jordan Atkins at 2.4K. We can look at him in general in flex. I wouldn't captain him because there's no ceiling there, but you can look at him in flex. He's had 4+ targets, or he's had at least 4 targets in 3 of his last 4 games. So the role is actually not that bad, even with Njoku in, and he would look really solid if Njoku ends up missing. Jamari Thrash had 1 catch for 11 yards last week. He's only really in play, in my opinion, if Elijah Moore ends up missing. Dante Foreman he's just always inactive, so we can ignore him. Pierre Strong, he had 2 carries for 5 yards last week. He's $600 in the flex, or in captain, $300 in flex. If you want to just slide him in there, maybe he gets a couple carries or a catch or something. It is risky as heck. I don't think it's necessary. Again, we are not paying up for a ton of like crazy awesome studs. Cordarrelle Patterson for the Steelers is another punt at 1.5K. Don't feel great about him. He had 2 touches last week, 1 fantasy point. He has had 1.4 fantasy points or fewer in the last 2 weeks. He's just not very involved. You can always make a play in a GPP that he will just randomly be involved on a short week. That is another thing to consider. While I love Najee Harris, historically on short weeks on Thursday Night Football, teams do tend to give their bell cow a little bit of a break because they just played. I mean, Najee just had 22 total touches last week, and that was his 4th game in a row with at least 21 total touches. So I would not be totally shocked if the Steelers pulled it back a little bit, and that would increase the value of Jaylen Warren, and maybe, just maybe, Cordarrelle Patterson ends up being an interesting value. I don't know if I want to captain Patterson. I think a couple lineups just for fun, just because we know Arthur Smith is a headache as an offensive coordinator. I think that could be interesting a little bit. Again, what am I paying up for? I don't know. But I think as a flex play, as a punt at 1.5K, he is okay. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just he's not a lock to get a ton of touches. All right, I think that is it. For the most part, my strategy is I'm favoring the Steelers. I don't hate the idea of playing Browns passing game weapons as a pushback against Pittsburgh having ownership and being favored in this game. Cleveland is at home. They should be playing from behind and racking up stats. So that's an okay approach, no doubt about it. But I just think the Steelers are going to control this game. They have so much more to play for. So I'm looking at Najee Harris. I'm looking at the Steelers defense. I'm looking at Chris Boswell. That trio is going to be a kind of a core of my builds, just because I think Boswell is going to be busy. I think Najee, even if they pull it back, he's still going to approach 20 touches. He's a good bet to score a touchdown or 2 here. And the Steelers defense should have a lot of success. And then where you prioritize those guys will kind of dictate what you do with everything else, whether you slide in Pickens or Russ Wilson. Just remember, it's not like a cakewalk matchup either. Like, Browns defense is not bad. They can get a lot of sacks. They've been stingy at times. So it's not like Russ and Pickens are smash plays by any means. And in the captain, I just don't think I need to take a crazy dive overall. I will absolutely take bullets on some of these guys I've mentioned, like Freiermuth or Chubb and stuff like that, and just to get myself a little bit different across many lineups. But for the most part, I don't think we need to take a crazy dive like that and get super different just for the sake of getting a super different. I'm just going to lean on Steelers and just try to get different in the flex, or try to get a little bit different with my Steelers exposure in the captain. All right, that is going to do it for me. Try to keep it under 20 minutes, and we did it. Hopefully this helps you. If it does in any way, smash that like button. Let's try to get this one to 30 likes. If we get 30 likes on this video, I will push out a Sunday Night Football Showdown slate video. I did it last time, even though we didn't get to 30 likes. But hey, I'm a busy guy. Let's get it to 30 likes, and then I will get it done. Be sure to also tune into our NBA DFS main slate breakdown for today, and keep an eye out for our NFL Week 12 main slate breakdown as well. Thanks for watching, and good luck.